then we give you the floor so that you can ask your questions live, and we will answer that. There will also be a chat function, as you all know, which my colleague Irina Kustova will monitor, and she will report back to us for the questions that have been raised there. So you can already see it will help if you do very good questions. Then Irina will be will probably send them to us. Then we have longer comments. Now, on the topic, in her political guidelines, you may remember the then European Commission President-elect Ursula von der Leyen has rightly, I think, highlighted that the success of the European Green Deal will crucially depend also on engaging with key partners and neighbors. It's well known that by 2030, according to the projections we are having, the joint Russian-Turkish greenhouse gas emissions are higher than the one of the EU and the UK together. And also we know that there is a very big movement towards climate neutrality or net zero globally. Currently, we have around 65% of the global emissions are already covered by a net zero commitment in one way or the other. And this is not just the European Union. Also, Finland has already a climate neutrality target by 2035, Sweden by 2045, of course, the UK, the US now with Biden, California, but also sometimes forgotten, all the Australian territories have a net zero target, New Zealand, China, and also the Ukraine, which is one of the topics we are discussing today. At the same time, many of the partners we are discussing today are very carbon intensive. And if you look at Russia, in terms of CO2 per unit of GDP measured in US dollars or Europe, Russia has almost twice the global average, far above China, for example, and double of Saudi Arabia, which is also an oil and gas producing country. In Ukraine, the situation is even, I would say, even more dramatic. In recent data from the European Energy Community Secretariat, it tells us that only if you measure only electricity and heat, then already the Ukraine emissions per unit of GDP are exceeded by some margin the Russian emissions. So there is a carbon risk, there is a carbon liability, so the economics of this will come into play as the world moves towards, at what speed we don't know, towards a climate neutrality. Now, this is the objective of our today's discussion, and I have the great pleasure to introduce you now the highly distinguished speakers of today. And I'm starting with Nick Butler, who is a visiting professor and the founding chairman of the Policy Institute at King's College. Formerly, he was group vice president for strategy and policy at BP and a advisor to the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And we all know him from his contributions on energy in the FT, the Nikkei Asia Review, and the BBC. Then we also have Oleksiy Rybyakin. He is an advisor on energy and the European Green Deal to the Deputy Prime Minister, and also an advisor to the Environment Minister. Previously, he was a Deputy Minister, so he knows the politics quite well. Deputy Minister and a member of the Ukrainian Parliament. He is an economist with a PhD in economics and also has studied on innovation and sustainability. So you seem to be the right person to answer all the hard questions to us. Mehmet Ötücü is CEO of the Global Resource Partnership in the UK and the London Energy Club, and formerly has a long list of jobs what he has been doing. He was also an advisor to the Prime Minister. He's a career diplomat in Ankara, Beijing, Brussels, and Paris, and he was both the head of the IEA Asia program and the OECD head of international investment, and also he was a British Gas group director. That must have been some years ago, I imagine. Tatiana Mitrova is well known to many of us. She's a research director at the Energy Center of the Moscow School of Management, Skolkovo, and also a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies and the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. And also, Tatiana, we are colleagues at Sciences Po International Energy Masters, where she is also teaching. Finally, Thorsten Wöllert, he is the EU's man in the EU delegation in Kiev on the Ukraine and the European Green Deal. Previously, he was posted in the EU delegation in Moscow, so he has a lot of experience in that part of the world. And I should also add, as a deputy head of unit in DG Klima, he was working on low carbon technology. So he is a climate change person, I should add. Just briefly about me, my name is Christian Egenhofer. I'm a senior research associate at the School of Transnational Governance and at the European University Institute in Florence, and a associate senior research fellow here at CEPS. With this, I would just like to hand over to Nick to set the scene, and I'm convinced that he will ask all the right questions. Nick, over to you, please.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank CEPS for organizing this event. I think it's very timely and a very interesting topic. I think it is almost impertinent for anyone from the UK to be part of a discussion on European policy. I think it would be even more impertinent to be at all critical. So I've promised not to mention vaccinations at all and to absolutely stick to the remit. The Green Deal, Europe's Green Deal, is a source of great interest here. I think I see it as the first major cooperative substantive EU program since the euro. And I see it on the scale and potentially the value of both that project and the Common Agricultural Policy 50 years ago. I think it's very ambitious. It builds on what's been done before. And of course, Europe has a good track record on green initiatives. But it goes much further than anyone has gone before, to an extent that I think that many people have not yet realized. It will have a major impact on many established businesses and their business models, and on every individual and household. It will change the way everybody in Europe lives, how they travel, how they heat their home, the nature of their work. I think what it does is take the European thinking on energy beyond the power sector and the first generation of renewables, beyond wind and solar, which have been the story of the last decade, really, into much more difficult areas of decarbonization. The freight lorries, the heavy industrial use of energy, aircraft. The whole picture is now part of the thinking. I think it will require new energy sources, such as hydrogen. It will require a great deal of new capital stock for industry and in buildings. And it will require enormous investment. The EU have put large numbers on it, but I think they are an underestimate of what it will actually take. And of course, it's not totally clear yet who will pay all those costs. And we have a similar challenge in the UK. It's working not quite in parallel, but it's certainly towards the same goal. So I don't think they're simple. And perhaps because they're not simple, most of the focus of debate so far has been on the impact of the Green Deal within Europe and what happens within the 27 economy. And again, it's the same in the UK. The international dimension has been secondary, but I think it is crucial and deserves far more attention, which is why I think meetings like this are important. It's crucial because the goal of the Green Deal is to avoid the risks of climate change. But we should not forget that the EU accounts for less than 10% of all global emissions now. The UK accounts for about 1.5%, and both those percentage shares are falling over time because of the growth of the Asian economies. So I think by 2030, Europe as a whole, if you include the UK, will be no more than 7% of global emissions, and there will be 93% from elsewhere. And I think if Europe is serious about the Green Deal, and this goes for the UK as well, it is very important that we pitch the policy and what we do to achieve the global goal and not just a local goal. Now, as I read the Green Deal, and there are people here who worked on it and who know it much better than I do, the first major policy initiative within it in relation to the international market is the carbon border adjustment proposal. The defense, as agreed and promoted by the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago, the defense against offshoring, so that if Europe is spending a lot of money making itself greener and lower carbon, people don't want to see industry moving elsewhere and jobs being lost as a result. Now, that sounds very reasonable, but I think it's wrong. And I think there's great scope for skepticism about this border tariff proposal. First of all, and there's been some very good academic work on this, it is not clear at all that the movement of manufacturing industry away from the EU over the last decade has been at all influenced by energy costs. It is driven by the fact that the market for manufactured goods is rather stronger outside the EU than inside it. And it is perfectly logical for many businesses to move. Energy costs for most manufacturers are a very small proportion of total costs. Secondly, I think the proposal as put forward is dubious because I can't see how the EU is going to have the ability to measure the carbon content of imports of steel, cement, whatever manufactured goods you want to list in detail without going back right down through the supply chain in a way that Europe just doesn't have the capacity to do. Thirdly, I'm doubtful about the value and indeed the ethics of limiting trade and therefore limiting economic growth from countries such as India, and indeed neighboring countries as well, countries closer to the EU, because I think that that is liable to retain the old capital stock in those countries. I think Europe should be investing in change, in developing modernizing different economies in the neighborhood and further afield, rather than putting up tariff walls, which to me smack a little bit of protectionism rather than a real climate policy. And I think the other weakness in the proposals as approved by the European Parliament 2 weeks ago is that they take absolutely no account of the possibility of retaliation. I don't think the United States or China or India is going to sit back and do nothing if Europe puts on tariffs. And I think Europe's future should be about using the Green Deal to create its own industrial and economic qualities so that it can export rather than cutting off imports. I think a better approach is that sort of engagement and investment. And a good place for that to start is the immediate neighborhood, the countries we're looking at today. There is no point having a clean EU in a dirty neighborhood. And as you said, Christian, all the forecasts show that some of the neighbors will be producing more emissions within the next 10 years than the EU, even before we have the impact of the Green Deal. So we're talking about 3 countries today, and I think the key questions I'd have for them are what concerns them about the Green Deal. Do they understand the carbon pricing proposals and what impact they'd have? Are they engaged with the EU in designing those pricing propositions? Do they understand the regulation that is being proposed in many sectors and how it affects them? Have they been consulted? And even more important, perhaps, what would they like to see? What would be the most constructive and valuable contribution to their evolution? Because I don't think any of the countries we're talking about want to be dirty, or they all want a clean environment. They understand what's going on in the world. I know Ukraine and Turkey better than Russia, but I think in all cases, there is an agenda of wanting to move in a constructive direction. And what can the EU do to go beyond its own base and actually produce a green region, a greener region, which sets an example to the rest of the world, and with policies which can be applied to other countries as well. This is an international challenge, and the EU should see it as such rather than just looking inward. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Let's go to Alexei. Nick has asked a number of questions. Is there engagement? Has there been consultation? And does the Ukraine and the other neighbors understand the motivation and how it will affect them? And of course, Alexei, want to hear what are your ideas of how we deal with a clean EU in a clean region. Alexei.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor for me to represent my country, to participate in such an important and timely discussion. And I would start that Ukraine sees itself as an integral contributor to the European Green Deal goals. We share the goal of the Green Deal, like the climate neutral continent. The climate neutrality is the one that we obliged to have on our Paris Agreement, and everybody who signed it there is an obligation to be the climate neutral till the end of the century. European Union decided that it will be the climate neutral continent till 2050, per se, meaning that if Ukraine is on the European continent, which is, so European Union decided that Ukraine also should be a part of this, and we agreed, we are moving to this goal. I wouldn't say a year yet, but as a person who in climate affairs for 15 years, and for 5 years I've been a COP negotiator for Ukraine, so I'm biased towards being this stuff, but we, as I said, already contributing to joint efforts worldwide, because we ratified the Paris Agreement. We are the part of the UN Sustainable Development Goal 2030, and we are implementing this agenda. And of course, I would say one of the main documents for us is EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. And we have huge amount of mutual obligation, and Ukraine approximating its legislation, doing a lot of climate stuff, and this is something that is emerging in Ukraine. But also, we do share the position of European Union that Green Deal should be, and path to the Green Deal should be just and inclusive. We appreciate and we will be lobbying the individual approach of involvement of Ukraine and other countries with association agreement within the European Partnership and Eastern Partnership. We see the how the Western Balkans have been treated in regard to the Green Deal and what proposals they are receiving. We are doing the same. And there are a lot of interesting stuff, and I would spend my time saying about the opportunities and challenges. So in regard to the opportunities, like we are working with a number of flagship initiatives jointly with the European Union. We have a Green Deal dialogue on the highest level between our Prime Minister Schmychal and Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans. And we've been 2 weeks ago in Brussels with the delegation. There was a kickstart of this Green Deal dialogue. On the top management level, this dialogue, and the leader of so-called Green Deal Task Force is the Deputy Minister on European Integration, Olga Stefanishyna, with whom I'm working, and we have a partner on the European side. So we have these task forces. In our side, there are like special deputy minister on European integration from numerous ministries. So we are like taking the Green Deal very seriously. We do understand, like answering the Nick Butler's question, like we do understand what it's all about. We investigate in these things. Like it's hard because the legislation is now being adopted, so in process. So it's hard to monitor it, but like it's like we don't know. So we work as a flagship initiatives, and already the one that been discussed. The first is like the increasement of energy efficiency along the whole energy supply chain for Ukraine. As Christian rightly mentioned, like energy efficiency is one of the key challenges, but also like huge opportunities, because I don't know where you have this dramatic, as you mentioned, statistic from the energy community that we would definitely consider, unfortunately, ourselves as one of the energy inefficient nation. But in regard to the CO2 intensity by country, I would say that we are lower than EU 27 on 30%, and we are lower than US 3 times, and on Russia twice. So Russia's CO2 emission by country in 2019, as I have, like, is much more higher than Ukrainian. And like if you're saying about the electricity sector, 50% of our electricity is renewables, around 25-30 is coal, the rest is like nuclear or gas. So like I wouldn't like, the situation is not so dramatical as it is, but definitely we have old Soviet equipment in heating, in electricity, and it needs to be upgraded. And this is what we are doing. So energy efficiency for us, it's a key priority, and working with the European Union in regard to this. And the second priority is a just transition of a coal sector, like huge problem for Ukraine, like it's a big burden for the national budget, it's a big burden for the regional budget. So we need to shift out of coal. We do understand the problematic. And like a lot of our private companies already, like who's dealing with coal, already declares the carbon neutrality up to 2040. So the state knows the situation. So for us as a priority, like I would say the situation here is not so dramatic as in Poland, like because as I said, like we have 50% of our nuclear mix, but yet it's a challenge for us. The third priority is the development of hydrogen energy. It's very interesting for us. It is like we see that Europe has some kind of a romance with hydrogen. Like we also would like to participate in this honeymoon. We would hope that it will be a marriage finally with hydrogen all over the world. But like we'll see. We would like to be a part of this industrial alliances and integration to the Ukrainian to the European supply chain is like definitely interesting for us. For example, we have lithium deposit, and if I don't know BMW, Mercedes-Benz willing to have Ukrainian lithium, which should be ethically with all the environmental standards like drawn out of the earth, and we would like to have green jobs in regard to this. Maybe the coal miners will start digging lithium. So like we see a lot of possibilities here, as well as the things that I'm personally working in, very interesting, like called climate governance architecture. So establishing of properly functioning national greenhouse emission trading system, ambitious NDC, linking CO2 taxation with the spending, and all of these kind of lots of acronyms. So like this is the one that we are like currently working according to our association agreement. I just returned from the forum called the Agro Green Deal. So agrarians are like a very huge potential, very powerful sector. And a lot of people have been asking, like very interested in this. Digitalization of economy, like Ukraine, like maybe it's off topic, like a promo for our Ukrainians, very, very talented IT people. For example, like 2 weeks ago, we were staying.
Yeah. No, you will need to come to the end, please.
Okay, I see that I have more 3 minutes, so I will do. So I'm doing time. Okay, so a lot of this could be done. And in regard to challenges, of course, it's like a financial and human resources. Like we have an ambitious plan, but like we do not have the sources of implementation. Of course, we have problem with the aggression and war from the Russian Federation, illegal annexation of Crimea, and my home native town of Donetsk. So, and what to do with the coal mining there? So there will be decarbonization there, like how to deal with this after this occupation, annexation will leave. This is like very, very problematic stuff for us. Climate skepticism, like this is definitely, I guess, shared view all over the Europe, and we are working with European Union how to raise the awareness to this stuff. Approximation of EU acquis. Maybe this is like a big challenge because we are doing simultaneously, I don't know, unbundling of our enterprises through the third energy package. We are doing the market creation, simultaneously integrating to NCA, NCG, and now we need to do some kind of a fourth energy package decarbonization. So like first you do the market, then you do proper decarbonization. So like this is like very problematic stuff, and we are doing, as I said, like, simultaneously and highly problematic. We have crisis in energy sector because of the renewable high feed-in tariff, and now the government is not able to pay its debts. So we are trying to do all this we're trying to be climate ambitious according to our European agreement, according to our obligation. It's hard. We have all the dialogue with our European partners present. Like yesterday, we have a dialogue on the CBAM, which definitely we see as not really the one that we need in our common obligation, our common trade. But we know how to be climate ambitious. Not maybe this CBAM would not be imposed to Ukraine in order for our climate governance architecture be in place. And I will be happy to continue this discussion with the respective panelists further. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. Excellent. Just for clarification, normally we measure CO2 per capita, and that is a measure for responsibility and capacity to deal with it. And there, of course, the numbers for Ukraine are very good. But you also can measure CO2 per unit of GDP, and that is a measure for the climate risk and for the liability. And here, these were the measures I was referring to, and this study, which was commissioned by the by the Energy Community Secretariat, has brought these numbers up. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Nick has asked, are you consulted? Do you understand? What are your ideas? And of course, the CBAM is, I understand, quite a delicate issue in Turkey. So, Mehmet, what does the CBAM discussion, for example, just do for those who try to promote climate policy? Because some say it's a sleeping gun, it's sort of a stick. If you do something, we're not using it. Does it promote those who want to do more climate policy, or is it a measure to rather hinder progress? But, Mehmet, over to you. I think you're muted.
Yes, thanks, Christian. And first, I have to tell you that I'm joining you from a location which is 100% carbon-free, 2,500 meter altitude on Kashgar Mountains, where I came for trekking and skiing. Therefore, I can assure you that there are parts of Turkey which is carbon-free. And EU-Turkish relations are critical in addressing this issue, which will be with us by 2050, if we are all alive. Turkey is the 6th largest economy in European Union context. And it is a very energy-intensive industry, huge room for improving efficiency, and it has almost 60% of its trade with EU. Most of the capital flows, technology, finance are coming from the EU as well. And both countries are locked in the EU accession process, which is not working. I don't think it's going to work in the foreseeable future. But we have a customs union in industry, especially industrial products. And there is an objective which Turkey pushed forward to modernize customs union into agriculture and services. We also have lots of political disputes, issues which are poisoning the relationship, be about EastMed, where Turkey is taking a very assertive position, which might lead to some sort of perhaps sanctions by the end of March if we don't carefully handle this matter. And we also have human rights, democracy, and so many other issues. Therefore, in the immediate neighbor of EU, you have a country where you have some contractual links with the eventual goal of full membership at some point in history. We don't know when. And huge trade relations, political, security, Syrian refugees, what you have. So under this context, we have to deal also with the climate change and the requirements of the Green Deal. In Turkey, the EU Green Deal has been actually met with some optimism and positive thoughts, because it is seen as an opportunity rather than risk to transform Turkish economy in such a way that we'll move away from energy intensive, relatively dirty sectors like aluminium, like glassware, ceramics, cement, into cleaner and greener industry. And we were at a stage where we needed to find the right finance to make this move relatively smoother. Turkish economy is heavily using right now fossil fuels, which we don't have. Turkey has dependency 98% in natural gas of imports, 93% in oil, and almost 50% for coal. Therefore, it is relatively easy for Turkey to make the transition less painful from fossil fuels to renewables. As a matter of fact, Turkey is also seen as a role model in many regards in terms of constituting its renewable economy. We have about 49 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, and every year we are adding 4,500 megawatt in wind, in photovoltaic solar, perhaps in the future also in hydrogen. And the share of natural gas in power generation came down from almost 55% to 20-25%. The share of Russia as providing Turkey's natural gas, pipeline gas, also came down significantly. So there is a transformation in the Turkish energy economy, which is, I think, quite positive in many respects. But we have a problem with regard to climate change. Turkey signed the Paris Agreement on climate change. However, it has not been approved in the parliament. So it's not part of the Turkish acquis right now. There is a strong pressure coming from within Turkey, civil society and what you have, but also from the international community. Now, the relations between Turkey and EU, as well as with Washington, are hitting towards a wall. You know, at the end of March, we might see relations with the US disrupted if the right decisions are not taken with regard to S-400 and PYD in Syria. And with EU also, because of the EastMed issues and other issues, there is a serious risk of rupture in relationship. Then how are you going to deal with this matter? Because Nick was mentioning that EU itself is around 10% or 11% of the carbon emissions around the world by 2030. And how are you going to impose your blueprint, which we all agree about the principles and objectives, on the 90%, the rest of the world? So I don't have any recollection that EU consulted Turkey, Ukraine or Russia or China for that matter. If you are going to impose tariffs, Green Deal objectives, sweeteners, sticks and carrots, whatever, and you need to consult these countries from the beginning rather than coming at the end of the process. But this is a process not, of course, completed within EU as well. So my guess is that Turkey is going to willingly or unwillingly approve in the parliament the climate change agreement. You know, after US putting its all efforts into that. EU is there. Even China is becoming a lead player. You know, in my time in the IEA and OECD, I worked very hard to bring China to the table, and they were using the same arguments that Turkey is using right now. So I don't think that it is sustainable for Turkey to stop the process of leading towards climate change agreement approved and taking real measures. I think there are already efforts in the parliament as well as in government in this direction. My guess is that this year it might happen. This is a good news. However, Turkey, like many other countries, would like to benefit from the financial incentives that will be available. We are talking about $100 billion euros between now and 2027, then $1 trillion for the whole EU Green Deal. And so these figures are quite attractive for any nation which is dealing with EU, and they want to also make the transition into EU Green Deal. So I think key here is first consultation with the concerned governments in the immediate neighborhood, especially for a country like Turkey, which is seen as an accession country, no matter how far the process will take place, and in customs union. So I haven't seen that. Otherwise, it's going to be a very difficult process to convince the Turkish government and industry players if you don't consult. Secondly, technology and finance flows. A country like Turkey really depends heavily on external finance for transforming its economy, making the necessary changes, regulatory changes by government, and also increasing awareness. Because I've been talking recently to different Turkish industry groups. Apart from one or two big groups, holding groups, the rest is hopeless. They need lots of support in understanding better what really Green Deal means. I mean, it's not only Turkish or Ukrainian. I'm sure the EU players also are not so much aware of it. It will take time. So when we do it within the EU, I think we have to do the same campaign to raise awareness and propose solutions as well. It's not only talking about it. It's not only threatening about the trade sanctions and what you have, or tariffs and carbon footprint. In this regard, I think my suggestion is that Commission should carefully engage all these nations as it does with its own membership, especially with special partners like Ukraine, Turkey, and Russia. And secondly, come up with some solutions on how to deal with the financing gap and financing need that this requires. We are talking about $1 trillion support. I don't know until when, in which framework, but what will be the conditions, terms for that? And also local capacities to be enhanced and strengthened. Then I don't think that, I disagree with Nick that there will be retaliation from EU and China, or US and China. Yes, if they are not consulted, if this is unilateral trade tariffs, but we know that there is also a campaign in the EU, in the US, New Green Deal, as they call it. And Biden might be perhaps more tempted to take a positive attitude to join forces with Brussels. We see signs of that. Transatlantic collaboration and partnership are becoming more and more a reality. It might work in this sense as well. And China, with the green growth strategy, I think they will be also more acceptable and receptive to such ideas coming. So EU, representing 10% of carbon emissions in the world, cannot impose its will globally. It has to work closely with immediate neighbors like ours, as you do very well.
To the end, Mehmet.
And it has to do with US and China as well. So this is a common objective of all us. There is also a trade perspective, economic gain perspective, because it's not, we are not doing it only for climate change. You have to bring the commercial element into it. It has to be seen as beneficial to our economies and the business groups. Let me stop here, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for these concrete suggestions. There are already a couple of questions in the chat. For example, you know, how could you have this engagement? Maybe we go later on there. But now let us go to Tatjana. Tatiana, what are the possible options for Russia-EU cooperation? It's a very different story than Turkey, which is not exporting, it's importing fossil fuels. What are these options also when you look at the positioning of different stakeholders? Tatiana.
Thank you, Christian, and hello everybody. So nice to see so many familiar faces and names in the chat. So look, first of all, I want to clarify the overall attitude of the Russian Federation towards climate discussion. Russia has been lagging behind this whole agenda. It has joined Paris Agreement only in 2019. And the NDCs that it has submitted last year, they are actually setting the target of 30% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, while today we have officially 50% reduction. So the target set is actually about increasing emissions during the next decade. And it says a lot about the overall attitude. There is a lot of skepticism towards the very idea of anthropogenic nature of climate change. There is a lot of skepticism about the ability of emission reductions to change anything. There is a lot of skepticism towards green energy and other decarbonization technologies. So basically, Russia remains one of the few states which is not actually assuming climate change and decarbonization as one of the real priorities of its social and economic development. And most of the efforts which are now undertaken on the state level, they are rather related with creating some good reports, with working with numbers, stressing the role of the forests in absorption and the absorption capacity, and arguing in different ways that basically we do not need to do anything real to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Russia. So that's the general landscape, and it should be understood. There is definitely some progress because 5 years ago, the officials were even simply refusing to discuss this issue. Now at least they've learned these words, decarbonization, energy transition. They start to speak about sustainability. There are some new laws and regulations and even low carbon development strategy being prepared. But all the drafts that I have seen that were published or sent to the ministries for consultations, they are about actually non-action. So how to pretend that we are doing something without really doing anything. And this is very pity because it means that in reality, at least for the next political cycle, which is until 2024, there will be no real measures on either carbon pricing or any other form of carbon regulation which could create incentives for the companies, for the industries to reduce their carbon footprint. There will be most likely some monitoring and reporting and disclosure systems introduced because control, this is something that Russian state really likes, but it's not about enforcement and creating framework which really leads for decarbonization. So this is the general scene. And then just imagine last year in the middle of COVID, Europeans suddenly announced that they are planning to introduce CBM. Like, what? So that was a real shock, believe me. And that was the only trigger that really made Russian authorities and large companies preoccupied with this whole climate agenda, because suddenly they felt that it is not a very hypothetical discussion of rich nations, of something that might happen in 50, 70-year time, but it is a reality which will start to affect their cash flows already in a couple of years. And that can really undermine this whole resource rent, which is the basis of the whole Russian economy. So I think this became really a strong trigger to start to look for the options. And of course, as with any new development, you know, anger, denial, yeah, negotiations. So all these 5 stages, we are going through them. I think we are currently approaching to the stage of negotiations. So when the authorities and companies realize that it is already like decided on the European side as a general trend, but not yet decided in details, which exactly industries will be and products will be affected. What will be the size of this carbon border tax? What will be the schedule of its introduction and how fast these rates will increase? How the carbon footprint will be calculated, which the question which was raised already. So will it be some average national technologies or comparable European technologies, or will it be a precise calculation of the carbon footprint of the specific product or for the specific company? I mean, it is exactly the situation of like devil in details. So many questions and many different assessments depending on the answer to these questions. So for example, BCG and KPMG, they've calculated that Russia will lose up to 5 billion euros per annum with the introduction of CBM. European institutions and some more optimistic Russian think tanks, they are speaking about like 1 billion euros per annum, which is still a lot, but not such a terrible disaster as many Russian politicians are saying now. So this unclarity, we know definitely that there will be something introduced in a couple of years, but we have no idea how it will look like and what will be the scale of this problem. And moreover, we don't understand how exactly should we prepare for that, yeah, with the in the most optimal way. So this uncertainty is, again, it's very much like with COVID. Uncertainty is the most frightening thing when you don't know what to do and how to adapt, but you understand that something is changing. I don't know whether it is a good feeling or bad feeling. There are some positive consequences, as I've mentioned. It was like a wake-up call for the whole Russian climate discussion, but at the same time, there were quite negative consequences. And it is more on the geopolitical side. You know, the current situation is already quite tough and not really cooperative. And this CBM mechanism, it is an overall pressure with the methane strategy, yeah, which could also affect Russian gas exports, with the new taxonomy, which could affect demand for the new fossil fuel projects and fossil fuel supplies to Europe. So it creates additional confrontation between Russia and the EU, which definitely doesn't help in the current environment. And trying to think what could be a positive way to proceed from this situation, I would say that, well, we saw already the stick. What is the carrot? Yeah, I mean, for the Russian side, currently, there are no positive incentives. There are no real positive outcomes which could incentivize Russian companies and Russian government to focus on the green energy and hydrogen, on general decarbonization of the whole industry. This is a pity. I'm sure that there could be many joint projects in the energy efficiency, which is the lowest hanging fruit, like in Ukraine. So there is a huge energy saving potential, which can be utilized at low or even zero cost. There is a huge potential on decarbonization of oil and gas, and Russia could really become a good partner for Europe in terms of CCUS and blue hydrogen and even green hydrogen, actually. But all these projects, the TRL is like 3 to 4. Yeah.
So you also need to come towards the end.
So they need joint R&D, they need joint investments, and there is no discussion about these joint investments currently. So I would call to look for carrots and to discuss them. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Tatiana, for also making proposals on the way forward, even if I interrupted you. Let's have this in the discussion. Now, I'll come to Thorsten Wöllert. You have heard what the different people have suggested, that we had very different views on the CBAM. Carrot works. The stick seems to work, it seems not to work, it depends a little bit, but there was also this point about awareness raising. Thorsten, maybe this is one you may want to pick up, but it's free, whatever you want to cover. But what is your take on all what you have heard? Just your first reaction, and then we go to Nick and to the discussion. Thorsten.
Yes, thank you, Christian. As you mentioned, I was posted to Moscow, to the EU delegation to Moscow for 5 years, and good to see Tatiana back again. And it reminds me a bit of the situation 15 years ago about LNG, when there was a lot of discussion. The LNG market globally was starting to pick up, and the discussion in Russia was more or less, well, that will never work. It's too expensive, physics don't work, nothing works. And there was a long phase of denial. And then suddenly, when the market was already starting to boom, then Russia entered the game and invested and built international partnerships and took it seriously. So I hope that we are seeing something like this also in Russia. I don't know when, but when Russia realizes that this is serious, and this is not just a kind of EU policy, because I think one of the problems with EU policy is that it's pretty fuzzy, because the EU has having so many phases and so many variants that it's very difficult for third countries to deal with it unless you create a special form. And this is what we try to do now with Ukraine, and I will come to this. But it is part of a bigger picture. It's part of the global picture. If you look at this whole decarbonization targets of different countries, completely different countries, like Korea, China, European countries, you named them, US certainly, etc. So if you are not becoming low carbon, if you are not going into a Green Deal direction, where will be your markets in the future? And the EU is now testing a tool set, which we don't know yet, which we are all developing, and we are all sort of worried, how will it work? I mean, colleagues mentioned this, but others will follow. And it's a bit like with emission trading. The EU was the pioneer setting up emission trading. We made a lot of mistakes, we learned a lot. And this is now, this experience is now being used in different forms in the different places on this planet. And it has an impact. It has a wider impact than just the EU policy. And I think this is something which is very difficult to understand if you are living in a big state with a centralized government with lots of geopolitics, lots of problems, that this is not just, the whims of somebody in Brussels. And the difference between, let's say, the EU and its immediate neighborhood, and this is what we are talking today, and let's say the global dimension is that, of course, we are trying in the EU, and I'm pretty sure the UK is on the same track, to build a low carbon economy, to modernize, to become more efficient, and to create the added value of the products of the 21st century, so that it's no longer only American companies who are dominating, social media, etc., but the new products also come from Europe. And the big opportunity, and this is what, you mentioned the stick, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but the real carrot, maybe the only carrot that Europe has to offer, is to say, look, we are developing the products of the future. We want to do this jointly with you. We want to have, let's say, Europe as a climate neutral continent, and we are serious about it. We want to have a dialogue with you, and we want to have a common market with you. And okay, Russia is, of course, in another situation, but with Turkey and with Ukraine, there are free trade agreements. With Ukraine, there's an association agreement, which is pretty ambitious. And this creates the framework for businesses, for research, for all these things to cooperate very closely together. And for instance, when you take the research programs, companies, institutes can participate in the European Research Program. When you think about investments, the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, they can invest in these countries. But then, of course, you come to the wider picture. Why do they not invest? Or where do they invest? And what are the other obstacles which have nothing to do with the Green Deal and nothing to do with climate policy? But let's say the tool set that we have is, I think we have both a lot of carrots, and the real carrot is joint investment, new value chains, and also, COVID told us also some lessons about vulnerability of global value chains and supply chains. And there's now a lot of discussion how you make them more resilient. And I'm pretty sure that the neighboring countries of the European Union can play a major role there for very obvious reasons, that you are no longer, you're much more robust in your response to any crisis. So the real question is, how will investments work? And this is something where we try to also work with in this dialogue that Alexei mentioned with Ukraine, to create conditions that the products of the future are being developed jointly. They are produced in a let's say, in value chains that span several countries, including non-EU third partner countries, and that the European market is open to these products, is open to these partners, to these investors, which then is also, because hopefully it will become a lead global market, will then also lead to opportunities globally. So if you can market your product, your efficient thing in the European Union or in the UK, you will certainly be able to also sell it to other countries at a very good margin. So you are no longer at the bottom of the value chain. You are no longer a raw material supplier, but you are producing added value together with partners. And this is what I think we have to offer. And now in our dialogue with Ukraine, we are very much looking. We had the meeting 2 weeks ago, was the meeting, as Alexei mentioned, of the Prime Minister with Vice President Timmermans. We agreed, yes, we will have a dialogue. We have agreed on the mechanics. We also have developed some ideas where we can start. And Alexei mentioned some of them, but we all understand that this is the very, very beginning of a very long-term process. And this is really a modernization program. And the carbon border adjustment mechanism is an important part, and it may really have the function of a wake-up call, as Tatiana has said. And I'm pretty sure also in Ukraine, a lot of businesses have started to look into this with more urgency than they would have otherwise. But this is just a small part of the wider picture. So if we focus too much on the mechanics of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think we're missing the big picture, which is all about investments. Maybe I stop here so that we have more time for discussion. Christian?
Yeah, Thorsten, thank you. You have raised a number of important points. I would like now to ask Nick to come in. There was a bit a bit different view on the CBAM as you had it. There was a lot of discussion on the sleeping gun. It's the kind of the potential stick we might want to consider if it comes. And that's also what, if I understand correctly, Torsten and the others, what the Executive Vice President Timmermans have mentioned recently, said, if you go for a 2050 carbon neutrality target, then we will consider to exempt you of whatever the exact language was. But Nick, technology cooperation, finance cooperation was mentioned, awareness raising, CBAM as a sleeping gun. And then there is also in the chat, there was this issue, which was a little bit more to Alexei, but also to Nick, huge potential of renewables in Ukraine, also in Russia. Now here a lot of points, but Nick, what do you take out of all these discussions? You're muted.
Thank you, Christian, and my apologies that I have to drop off at 1:45, but I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and it actually shows to me that we're only at the beginning of this process, and that the Green Deal is very much a work in progress that is far from finished. I agree with an awful lot of what Torsten said, so I won't repeat it. What I would say is that the focus has been on the border tariff adjustments because of their impact, their potential impact, and people's concern about that down to the corporate level. And the fact that there hasn't been enough engagement on all the other things that you talked about, on investment and technology and cooperation. And we've talked about 3 countries. They're very different. I think Ukraine is doing a lot. Russia, I quite understand Tatiana is in a different place. Turkey, I was very intrigued to hear that it's seen as a great opportunity. And that's very good. But I think the EU, if it's really serious about the Green Deal, is going to have to engage country by country, understanding where they start from, not just with these 3 countries, but with many others. I've been writing about India this week, and I think whether they are affected by the border tariff is now an issue there. And I hear the point that you said, Christian, just now, or I think you said, or somebody said that if countries commit to a 2050 target, they will be exempt from these border tariffs. I don't think that's very credible, is it? Because it's so easy for politicians to commit to 2050 targets. It's the easiest thing in the world, which is why 110 countries have done it. And therefore, if you exempt those who've said the right words, you don't have much impact. And I assume the border tariff is designed to have an impact. I don't think it's very well designed. And I think this engagement and cooperation would be much more constructive. I think it's important, and this is my last point, because I think confidence in the Green Deal within the EU and the comparable measures within the UK will only be sustained if we see that other countries are moving in the same direction. They won't all move in the same way, at the same pace, but the issue is universal. And I think if the costs of this, which I think are quite substantial and are going to now become visible, to create a hydrogen industry and hydrogen clusters and all the other things that you need to create the infrastructure for carbon capture and storage, all these things cost an awful lot of money. And the only people who pay are either the consumers or taxpayers. And they're going to realize that these bills are coming in. And I think people broadly support the Green Deal and its equivalents. But I think if we can't, through engagement, show that other people are moving in the same direction, some of that credibility will be lost, and therefore support will be lost. So I think it's a very good discussion. And Christian, I hope that CEPS will organize this sort of thing with other countries as well, with the Indians, with with South Africa, with China, because climate change is a global issue, not just a European one.
Thank you, Nick. I'm happily taking up your offer, so you will get an email from me eventually to keep this up. But I also hope that we can keep our European tribe, if I may say it casually, engaged in this discussion, also in the global discussions. It's not just the European, as you say, Nick, it's a global. Now, I would like to hand over to the panelists, if they wish, to comment. Yeah, Oleksiy, you have also seen a couple of points in the chat, and the others, some of our bilateral, so please handle them or comment to them. Oleksiy, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for moderating such an interesting discussion and for all panelists for their intervention. What I'm trying to observe, as I said, like I'm a climate negotiator for 5 years. And it's really like almost the same attitude on the climate negotiation from different parties. So like together with Turkey, we share the same problem. So in Kyoto Protocol, we were kind of countries in transition, basically trying to win from the Kyoto Protocol and from these quotas. And now, like, there is no countries in transition, there are only developing and developed countries. So we're just sticking in the middle. And for example, we share the same problem with Turkey, as Mehmet said. We are not the part of the GCF, Green Climate Fund, which is like has a billions of euros, dollars to spend, and we are not eligible toward this. So like we do share the ambitions. We need to transform our economy, but like we are not able to have this money because of the some bureaucracy, some diplomacy. And interesting that like our delegation is behaving differently, like tackling the same problem, as well as Russian Federation was always in denial of climate change. But it's obvious because like when you have a lot of fossil fuel economy, your economy is basically based on the fossil fuel. So like you will deny, you will say like it's not anthropogenic, etc., etc. But like with the CBAM, I see the basically the hysteria of Russian like policymakers, top level, saying like why on earth, like what it will be. And like I met different Ukrainian entrepreneurs that they participate in different forums, and speaking with Russians, they said, yeah, like Ukrainians and Turkey, like they will agree with Europe, everything. They have association agreement, they have this kind of deal, and Russia will be the one who will suffer, who will pay. Like the way to change it is like my advice is just to engage in a consultation. Like 2 weeks ago, we were with Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina. We were negotiating with European Commission on economy, Paolo Gentilini, on regard to CBAM. We have the consultation. We are engaged early in this process. All the ministry had the technical expert, even not the consultation, but just like the discussion, like what it's all about. Because like we are planning to have the emission trading system 2025. If the CBAM will be notional ETS, will be somehow reflective the price of the ETS. So like I don't know, like maybe we need to to speed up the process or to design it differently. So for us, the basis is association agreement, and our ambitions to do this. And what I see that our businesses first, they started, they climate change like 5 or 10 years ago. They was not interested. They were just interested in making profits from renewables, renewable energy. But currently, I see a lot of this climate neutrality, carbon neutrality statement from different companies. And for example, we have one company that they have the electric metallurgical plant. They're saying like we receive the competitive advantages because we have less CO2 production, and we will win the European market. Some of the companies like lobbying the financial reconstruction strategy, but like definitely Ukraine is willing to attract more finance, is willing to go to this because they are our civilization choice, and like we have no other to do. I'm happy to communicate with our colleague on this regard.
Oleksiy, can I just interrupt you quickly, because there were quite a few questions about the renewables. We know there is a big renewables potential. So people are saying, what would be a realistic time frame to develop that? Now, that's a hard question, but still, I think I would like to put it up to you. How could you, as a personal capacity or as in your professional job, see this evolving?
Yeah, we are going to the renewable, like it's like now like 7 or 8%, and we are in financial crisis, like in Spain, like in Greece, so like we are trying to deal with this. because the government obliged to pay the high feed-in tariff, and now like in some crisis basically, but like we don't have other options to go for renewable, and the first victim of renewable will be the coal. But it's also very interesting that in 2023, like we have a very ambitious plan to integrate Ukrainian energy system with NSA, with European one. So we will disconnect from Russia and Belarus, which we will connect through Soviet Union, and we will connect fully to the European Union, which means that we will be able to balance our energy system with the energy flow from Europe, which means that the coal generation, the coal fleet might just die and be obsolete. Also in 2030, the high feed-in tariff will be over, and the cost of this renewable will be so low. So there is no economy in coal, although it's like a huge burden, huge technical, huge human resources problem, and we need to deal with this. But as I said, you know, like we are trying to do this, trying to integrate our coal mine workers, and I feel very painful for people from Donbass who is now in the occupation, and like there will be the decarbonization, but like they will receive nothing, unfortunately. So a lot of this kind of problem will emerge, but definitely the Ukrainian energy sector will benefit from its 50% renewable, and the rest will be 50% nuclear, and the rest is renewable.
Thank you. I assume the coal phase out or redevelopment of coal region is certainly very high on the agenda, if it's not the highest, I imagine. Maybe could I just also go to the other panelists? The Renewable Corporation, you mentioned it, Alexei, is not a secret, you know, renewables are cheap. But there's still a few issues of how to have the market design ready, and there has to be political willingness. Mehmet, there's a lot of, there has been a very positive and a very successful renewable strategy in Turkey from a very low level, but it had a lot of stuff. So how is that, would that be an area, you know, you talked about technology, you talked about finance, would that be possibly an area to cooperate? And how could one integrate this in a broader Black Sea regional cooperation than just sort of a, you know, Turkey, EU, because there's a lot of countries around there, and maybe something similar to Tatiana. What could be the areas is renewable something, or is it a dead end? What could be the areas to really kick off these discussions? You made a couple of concrete recommendations. Maybe Mehmet, you're muted.
With this, let me tell you a couple of things. First, EU-Turkish collaboration partnership has significantly failed in many areas, including energy collaboration, because EU focus was too much, I think, on natural gas, it's coming from Russia or not, then also climate change. So it has to be seen in a broader context of the relationship, and the poisoned relationship at political level has affected also energy, climate change collaboration. There is so much to do. We did a lot of work in Brussels, also with some Turkish partners, how to step up energy, climate change collaboration between Turkey and the European Union. I think we failed in that. There is a need to relaunch that. Also to perhaps delink energy, climate change collaboration from the political issues, which always poison whatever you do. So I think there is a need for differentiated approach. And if we want to succeed in what we will do with regard to Green Deal, and I think the political bottlenecks should not be a stumbling block. Secondly, I don't hear much about what the benefits will be to the men in the street, men and women in the street. We talk about the governments, companies, how they will benefit, but is it going to increase the cost of living and the prices, compliance issues, trade restrictions, investment, how it's going to affect the ordinary people in the street who have no idea what Green Deal is? I think in the awareness raising campaign, this is a critical issue. We need to win the hearts of the people in the street as well, not only the experts, government officials, or company executives. And apart from this, of course, this could also be used as a foreign policy tool, instrument, not only as a trade instrument. So I think these issues need more clarification in Brussels so that this is a real encompassing collaboration, partnership, consultation at all levels, if we want it to succeed. Otherwise, as usual, if we try to impose EU will and blueprint on others, it will backfire on such a goal which everybody agrees on its importance. Turkey is very successfully transiting from fossil fuels to clean energy. As I said, 49 gigawatt of renewables energy capacity, and each year we are adding another 4,500 megawatt capacity, more than $3 billion, and it's going to be even further. And we will also improve energy efficiency, almost 30% in construction and transportation sectors. So these, without any collaboration from the EU or any pressure. So towards our common goals, I think there is a lot of possibilities to work together. I'm not talking on behalf of government, of course, in my own capacity, as far as I can see, from Ankara and elsewhere. Therefore, the critical issue is also to make sure that there is enough finance for right projects without any discrimination, and engaging on an equal footing all these partners, rather than seeing them as little partners that can be pushed around through this and that. So carrot and sticks should be very balanced in this regard. So I want to stop here, Christian.
Thank you, Mehmet. Tatiana, Mehmet made the case of de-link the climate change from the political poison, which has just been raised a little bit the last weeks. Is that possible? That's the first question. But also the second, does it make also sense for Russia, as the awareness is a little bit less developed, and as in Turkey, and of course, as a fossil fuel exporter, the interest situation is very much different. There were no questions no raised hands on the chat. So, we can stick here with ourselves. You saw the questions in the chat.
Yep,
and maybe, Torsten, I give you then the last word. Afterwards, we are coming to the end. You may want to conclude, otherwise I'll do it. You have a choice. Tatiana.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. So look, first of all, on the political side, this is basically a proposal which was made already by the Russian officials, in particular by Delgiriv, who is President Envoy on Climate, saying that, look, let's make an exchange. We will cooperate in climate, and you will not impose any sanctions on the projects which are somehow climate related. Financing, technologies. So, I mean, this is already part of the discussion. I'm not sure that it's really a good way forward, but Russia is already trying to play this card with the sanctions. And it might work, because definitely access to finance and access to the modern technologies, these are two things which are already becoming more and more difficult under different sanctions. On the second issue about awareness, I believe, frankly, that it's probably the most important first step which needs to be done, because until people are not sharing these values, until there is basically no civil society awareness, until most of the population is very skeptical and fed with different myths about climate. Just watch Russian TV, it's incredible. There will be no support which is there in place in Europe. Popularization, explanation, as much as possible, communicating what is happening and what are the potential benefits on different levels, on the state level, on the corporate level, and on the personal level of benefits of climate action. It is really the first necessary component to start any movement. And there could be, actually, there is a question from Federica on any cooperation between EU and Russia on the climate matters before 2024, I think it is possible, but it needs quite a lot of efforts from both sides. I know at least 20 different hydrogen projects right now in Russia looking for European partners, investors, and support. They don't know even where to go and how to shape these projects. There is zero state support or subsidy in Russia. So obviously they cannot fly without any push, but they cannot reach out to the Europeans. They do not understand how to do that. So different platforms for discussions, different frameworks which would actually encourage such sort of projects in renewables, in hydrogen, in CCUS, in energy efficiency. Once again, I am sure that there is huge potential. We've made several energy management exercises together with the German Energy Agency, 30% reduction of emissions in 1 year. So that's a huge field for cooperation, but it needs indeed a lot of efforts from both sides.
Thank you, Tatiana, for repeating this. I think it's well noted. Torsten, you want to come in? We have about 4 minutes left.
Yes, just some additional comments on possibilities of solving this dilemma between political issues and trying to move ahead on, becoming more efficient, becoming greener and cleaner, etc. As I said, the EU is very diverse. We are not a centralistically organized state or institution. So we have lots of different things. And there are lots of different things which are available to partners in third countries, which don't really depend a lot on politics. For instance, we have the Covenant of Mayors, where cities, mayors, regions can exchange best practices on how to become more efficient. And they have a 20% climate reduction target. They get some support. And we have, I think, it's more than 300 Ukrainian cities who are already participating. And we have cities from Belarus and from Moldova and from Georgia, etc. Armenia, I think, is in there. I checked the map maybe 3 months ago. Russia was not in there. Not a Russian single city was in there. Why? I don't know. But this is available. We also have, for instance, co-regions and transition platform. It's a platform where also Ukrainian regions, cities, mayors, companies, NGOs, etc., can come to Brussels, can go participate in virtual workshops, can exchange directly with their counterparts in different countries in the European Union. It's up to them. It's their choice. They want to have a Spanish region, they go there. They want to have a German region or a Czech region or a Polish region, they go there. And this is not depending on politics. This is really driven by the demand of the regions and by a common vision to create a future for these regions, for the coal regions beyond coal. When coal is out, the region has to live, the region has to have a thriving economy. There's a very new initiative, which is called the New European Bauhaus. And this is essentially also a kind of grassroots platform where like-minded people all over the place can exchange ideas about the city of the future, about architecture of the future, environmental services of the future, etc. These things don't depend on governments. And I mean, we are working very well with the government in Ukraine, but for instance, the Covenant of Mayors, the cities took the initiative. They became part of this European platform, even though at that time, some 10 years ago, the government didn't really think this was a priority for the government, but the cities moved ahead. So we are very, we are not in a centralistic mode, and it's neither black or white. So we have a lot of colors, and I think we should discuss this more. But the final word I leave to Christian, of course.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Torsten, also for opening that debate. We are at the close of the meeting, so let me just say a couple of concluding remarks before I would all of you thank you, also the participants in there. it came to me that the awareness is becoming a very, very important issue. Awareness at all kind of levels, at the state, the municipal, the local, etc., etc., but also at the corporate. And I think Tatjana made this very, very clear, and I think also Mehmet. Then also the person in the street, through all kind of initiatives which we have designed. Torsten just mentioned it in the EU, coal transition in coal regions in transition, etc., etc. When you look to the Ukraine, it seems there is a lot of dialogue, consultation, all the things are there. We have, of course, an extremely structured relationship. It now needs to be implemented. And I have taken a lot of confidence in Alexei to take care of this, to get this done, and his colleagues to get this done in the future. Now, Turkey is different, Mehmet. I think the key message I took home from you is how to de-link the climate change, where there is a lot of activities, a lot of passion, a lot of interest from the political poison. And again, this leads us to sort of non-governmental cooperation, but also it can include government cooperation. And we have mentioned all the points being renewable and many other. You also mentioned finance as an important area, and I can see where you're coming from. So maybe that's the renewables together with the finance in the cooperative framework in the region could maybe one area. Also, not just having the EU focus, but having a broader focus beyond the equal footing, Mehmet, you mentioned. Again, I think this is something for all the countries, whether we talk Europe or not the Europe. Then when you look to Tatjana's contribution, again, the awareness was coming up again, but there the focus is very much on the technology. You mentioned technologies, no need to go through them. Again, of course, we all know the hype on renewables. There's a bit less hype in Europe on CCS and carbon capture storage and carbon capture and use, but there is some things going on, renewables, of course, etc. So that is promising. I think there is, we have identified a number of good areas in bilateral, but also in a more regional perspective. So that leaves me just to thank all the panelists for their excellent contributions, and all the participants for having joined us today. And I want to finish this with a promise that we continue this debate with all of the countries we mentioned here, with all of the countries around Europe. There was a reference to the Mediterranean, of course, a very important region as well, and also going beyond the Europe, beyond the southern Mediterranean. So thank you for this contribution, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for organizing and having us.
Thank you. It's great that you all could make it. Okay, we'll follow up. Okay, good then. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Enjoy, Mehmet, enjoy your hiking and skiing or whatever you do.
Thank you. Come and join.
Okay. Give me 2 days.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
See you.
Thank you, Alexei. Okay, then take care. Bye-bye.